My name is Tshara Gardner, and I'm here today with two of my children, two of the three children that were viciously attacked by a dog on February 12th, 2014. Today is the 5-year anniversary of that day, and it's permanently etched in my mind as something that I will never forget. BC is now 11 years old, and she was 6 at the time that it happened, and Avery is now 10 years old, and he was 5 at the time that it happened. BC, can you tell them a little bit about what you remember?
Yeah, so I remember being on my friend's dad's truck, and so we just saw a dog across the street. We didn't really think anything about it, but then it started running over towards us. So I was just scared and started running towards my house, but I had fallen over a crack, and the dog had got me. And I remember just being in the street seeing her family, and that's all I really remember.
And at the point that I came into the situation, my son was in the garage getting a basketball, and he had been watching the little kids outside playing, and he heard screaming, which he at first thought was laughing. And then when he realized it was screams of terror, he ran down the street, and he saw Adebisi in the middle of the street, and the dog had a hold of her and was biting her. At first he had a hold of her neck, and then he had a hold of her arm, and he basically drug BC up and down the street. Thank goodness BC had on a jacket that day. I had told her that it was chilly outside and that she needed a jacket. The doctors have said that the dog would have been able to take her arm off from her body if not, but because of the protection of the jacket, it was a large piece of her arm was missing and bleeding, and BC was in shock, and she didn't even know that that part of her arm was missing. Actually, the ambulance brought it to our attention because she was walking around just in shock. She didn't even understand what had happened to her. And we were taken to McLean Children's Hospital, where BC underwent an emergency surgery that day, and then they let her rest for a day, and then she underwent another surgery. And the doctors were hoping that they wouldn't have to take skin from another part of her body to cover it on her arm, and BC was just blessed, and they were able to actually close up the meat that was hanging out, and it was a very, very painful for her, but they were able to close it up, and she was able, to have her wounds begin to heal. For the first couple of weeks after she came home, we did have to pack the wound ourselves at home, and she did have to have pain medication, and it was just an extremely horrifying experience with her crying and being in so much pain. So it was terrible. She also had severe scars to her face where the dog had picked her up and thrown her down, and picked her up and thrown her down several times. He had bitten the side of her neck. She had a big black eye. She had a busted nose. It was a very, very scary, horrific thing to be able to see. And basically the doctor said that we're blessed that the dog didn't bite her just in the right area on her neck, or she wouldn't be with us. Avery, did you want to share a little bit about what you remember the day of the dog attack, and when the dog...
I was throwing some rocks at the dog to get the dog after BC. Then after I just started running. Then the dog came after me. Then I tripped on something. Then I fell over and the dog just got me.
Yeah, and Avery had scars on his arm, tiny little bites from the dog, where the dog had gone after his arm over and over again and bit him up and down the arm. And he was shaken up too, and both of them were taken to the hospital that night, and they were...
Have like a cast.
Yeah, he had to have like a casting on his arm for a while, and he has... Do you still have some of the permanent marks on there? He's still got some of the marks on there from it. It's important to me to advocate in this because this was a horrific incident that I never could have imagined. This was a very nice neighborhood. Neighbors kind of knew each other pretty well. We had never seen the dog in our neighborhood before, period. No one even knew the dog existed. What we found out after KPD did come, and they ended up having to shoot and kill the dog because it was still trying to attack people, and they couldn't get the dog under control. Once KPD did their investigation, what we we found out was that the owner had a fence that was rotting, and the fence had been rotting for quite some time, and there had been a couple of neighbors behind the house that had complained of other dogs being able to get out of the fence. So basically, with the neighbor knowing that this fence was rotting, these are the kind of things that I want to advocate, that if, we go to the city of Killeen and we get some ordinances in place so that dog owners understand, we love dogs, our family loves dogs, I grew up with big dogs, I love dogs. It's not about bashing animals and it's not about bashing dogs, it's about making sure that if you own a dog, you understand your responsibilities. And in that case, I feel like this could have been quite simply prevented if the owner had have paid attention to what was going on and done what he had to do to fix it. And the other thing is that the owner, along with most owners, think that their dog isn't vicious. He said that the dog had never displayed any type of vicious behavior. I have no reason to believe that the owners had raised the dog to be vicious in any way. I didn't, get that feeling from them, but the dog displayed this behavior and nobody knew that it was coming. So owners have to understand that you have to protect other people from your dog, because you have to understand that it's an animal, and you have to assume that at the end of the day you don't have control of how that dog might react. And also, in advocating for animals, dogs are people too in their own right, and so things that we might not know can upset them or bother them, can spin them out of control. And if they're not on a leash or they're not protected in the fence that they're in, we don't know how they'll react and what they'll do. So it's so important to me that we advocate for these type of things. I want to change some of the city ordinances. I want to come down a little harder on owners with protecting the public from their animals, so that they'll understand that if I don't do this, it's not just going to be a ticket. There's going to be serious consequences for this. And then on the other side, being an educator myself, I just believe that education is the most important part of it. And owners have to be educated on understanding. Like, I see dogs running loose without leashes, and I know that it seems like, oh, it's free and it's okay, and it seems like that, and there was a time when even I thought that. But now I understand that if you don't have control of your dog on a leash, anything can happen and you won't be able to stop the situation. And also, it's important for parents to educate their children and for adults to be educated. You see children run up to stray dogs and touch on them and grab on them. You see a lot of stuff, at parks, or you see kids go pick up dogs. You have to educate your kids too, to be careful, because they're people too, and they might react a certain way if you touch their tail or you touch them a certain way, and we don't know what can cause them to react. So we have to be very careful about, telling our kids that we have to give them distance, and we have to give them boundaries, and we have to give them respect too. And I think that if we educate both sides on, how to deal with animals and how to really, think about how we need to protect both sides, I think that we can stop things like this from happening.